While browsing some old YouTube videos, I became aware again of the term lost media as it's currently being used. It's a term that is actually a very simple portrayal of a rather complicated subject. And since what I do overlaps with what lost media is, it might be worth exploring that. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. In this particular case, there's a YouTube video about lost media being rediscovered. It tells you stories about cartoons and audio and images that are thought to be gone, that become descriptions, but due to a series of inscrutable, strange situations, they become available again. The whole thing is presented to you with really scary music, really dark, dirgy stuff echoing in the background, which I think really gives it a sense of being some sort of eldritch horror that people have to step through to recover these lost jewels of media. It's funny to me because on one level, it's nothing like the work I do. But in other ways, it's exactly what I'm trying to do day in and day out. We're in a very special time with the Internet Archive. Hundreds and often thousands of items are being uploaded every day from tens of thousands of people, each with their own agendas and ideas and outlooks on what should be shared with the world. And I will see people who are following a trend. They'll have a large stack of maybe a computer disk collection, and they'll begin the process of turning them digital, uploading them one by one, and putting some sort of description on them. Maybe it's as simple as whatever's written on the outside of the packaging, and other times it's not even that. These are large collections. Thousands of new items a day adds up incredibly quickly to something that no human could really understand the scope of. It's going to be impossible unless you have very specific tastes and you know exactly how to look for something, that you're going to be aware of what's coming in. And there's two different ways that you experience things: voluntarily and involuntarily. Voluntarily, I mean, is when you're looking for something. You're looking for magazines. You're looking for a video game character or a performing artist or something from a general subject area, maybe a genre, and you find it. The other way is when you're just browsing, seeing what comes by, piles of different indeterminate media, until something leaps out at you. In today's world, we are getting less and less of that general randomness. We tend to have things be rather directed. If you use any professional music service now, you tell it what genres you like, and you say that you like it or dislike it, and it will modify what you see based on your perceived wishes. In one way, that's great. If you love a genre, you will get it infinitely. If, however, you didn't even know that there was something else to choose from that was important to you, you're going to miss out. In the archive, going through the open collections provides you with an insight into all sorts of materials that people think are in some way important, paired, unfortunately, with an often inadequate amount of description as to what you're looking at. You might see a newsletter with a title and a few subjects in it, but not be aware how that newsletter was produced, what that group was that produced it, where it was important, and what part it played in history. I don't expect everybody uploading something to be the expert on everything they're uploading. but it does leave a gap. I'm delighted that the gap is between what they have uploaded and how they've described it, instead of the gap of wanting something, really hoping you can find it, and it being nowhere to be found. That said, there's a lot of undiscovered treasure at the Internet Archive and on the Internet in general. People have uploaded things that they thought were important, but then it's pretty hard to find out where those went. So in the narrative of lost media will be the story of something being rumored, the hype cycle, I'll call it, where you find out that there was a third episode that never aired, or there's a newsletter that was struck down and censored and can't be found. Maybe you'll read an interview or a story in which somebody mentions working on a project, and that project is lost to time. And there has kind of built up into the narrative of the current online world that if somebody mentions having or being aware of the location of some piece of media, it is not just polite, not just nice, but a duty, a requirement to make it universally distributed. The idea being that the media of the internet is so well built for distribution that the perceived sin of lack of access to something means that you have to have a victory at the end, at which something becomes everyone's property. It's very compelling. Hearing a rumor of something, letting it build up in your mind, and then one day finding a zip file or a story in which it's revealed that the long-lost mystery object is back is catnip. It's sugar. It's a dopamine rush. And so various lost media arcs have risen up. What they are is clickbait. The idea that something was gone forever and now we found it. And frankly, there's not a whole lot that can fall under that. I'll give an example of my own favorite quote-unquote lost media. That was the show Turn On, which was broadcast on ABC and only got through its first episode before it was completely canceled. It was a reimagining of television as a series of skits, supposedly being done by an insane computer that was switching between them as fast as possible. The first episode played, and the complaints were so intense that many affiliates across the United States were actually not coming back from the commercial break, but instead putting in reruns and then canceling. In some markets, only the first segment of the first episode ever made it to air. Supposedly, there were more episodes, and they were never to be seen again. Truly lost media. Until they weren't. They weren't because they weren't lost media. They were just media that wasn't being put anywhere for people to find. They were sitting in an archive, in a television archive, and then ultimately, those leaked online. And by the word leaked, I mean they went online. At that point, something that I had heard about when I was 12 was now available on YouTube to see. I could make my own judgments. Now, granted, 50 years later, Turn On seems like a pretty benign show. Nothing too much or too little that we wouldn't see on television or cable or a streaming service. But you can put yourself in the mind of somebody turning on their television, watching this go by, and being utterly confused at what they're looking at. Experimental television has always been fraught with immediate pushback. It's not great when something that functions as a mental utility suddenly acts weird or out of bounds. It is a constant balancing act between what will be acceptable and what will be interesting. So, we live in a world now where Turn On is no longer lost. It's available. It's instantly streamable. But frankly, it was never really lost. But if your income, if your clickbait requires people to be drawn to watch you talk about things being gone, things missing, you need to put a little pizzazz on it, razzle-dazzle. So that's where we get the current narrative of Lost. Lost in many ways can mean it never existed, it probably existed, it existed in pieces and drawings and sketches, and we don't have immediate access to it. And a series of gatekeepers or MCs will tell you about it with scary music in the background and a lot of open-ended questions. What happened to it? Where will we find it? What's going to happen when we find it? This sense of menace and held back potential buried among this unknown footage, these unreleased songs. Look, I'm not going to fault anybody for having a pitch, for having a way of getting attention, but I deal in this. This is what I do. And I'll tell you that there are such an abundant number of interesting media, interesting works, interesting writings, all depending on a person's ability to introduce others or go on their own journeys through these piles of material. There are newsletters written with such verve, such outward naivete or sense of potential and trust in humanity, and you can find them in all of their photocopied glory on the archive. Newsletters about computer groups, radio groups, tracking down unknown mysteries, UFOs, conspiracies. A sense of somebody handcrafting their own outlook on the world and then providing it for a vanishingly small audience. A 1960s science fiction zine that has a few dozen subscribers. A Commodore 64 user group numbering in a few dozen that centered around a single town, and with their only remnant evidence being a few stacks of pages. In some cases, people assembled posters and flyers in their basement, in their library, and then somebody else came along, scanned them all, and have put them up as one big, solid, multi-hundred-page PDF file for us to see. These are audiences that were never dreamed of when these first came out. There's a fundamental honesty in these writings because they're written for the time and for the people. There is something magical looking at a corpus from somebody. When somebody makes an audio magazine or does a series of videos around a subject, finding out that chapter after chapter came out of this person until they gave up the project. The idea that somebody will go on an arc of description of something important to them and share it with others plays out again and again and again. It is so fundamental to the human spirit to want to communicate with others about things that are important to you. The reason that the release of Discmaster.textfiles.com was so important to me was that it was a knock on the head across terabytes of CD-ROMs and DVD-ROMs, where information was placed into them for the purpose of either filling plastic or accompanying some magazine, or simply to get $10 out of people while selling them things that could be found on any bulletin board system. And by having machinery go through it, reassess it, and adding a specialized search engine, people have been discovering all sorts of lost media. Game demos for games that were canceled, or versions of those games that were never seen anywhere else, applications and utilities for all sorts of interesting processes. And of course, images and writings buried deep inside of zip files or parts of documentation, listing appearances by people now gone or in a different career, and showing what they were writing 20, 30 years ago. They are, in many ways, found. But, as I hope you've understood, none of them really were ever lost. They were simply waiting to be found. Let's see what we find in the future. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I'll say it again. Never let me get in the way of a good showtime. If you want to listen to a video where a person tells you about things that have been quote-unquote recovered with scary music and echoing sounds inside of a CD-ROM file that has been sitting around for 8 years, somebody found a zip file containing what was thought to be an unrecoverable piece of data. Don't let me stand in the way of it. It's a campfire story. And campfire stories make the time go by and give what is normally a rather mundane activity a thrill of adventure.